So we're here at the Sentosa Golf Club at the Titleist National Fitting Center in Singapore. Have the pleasure of being joined by Andrew Rogers. Andrew, tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do here at Titleist.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for coming. I run our National Fitting Centre here. We fit all of our players from supported professionals, elite amateurs, all the way down to beginners. So anyone who wants to get their equipment looked at or get a fitting, we're here to help.
Everyone talks about driver fitting, iron fitting, but let's talk about wedge fitting. How important is wedge fitting?
Wedge fitting's critical. It's arguably the most important part of your bag to get fitted. Every player will use their wedges more than any other club in their bag, and it's the kind of club that will save a bad game and really help you on a good game. It can elevate your game to a new level, just confidence around the green.
So let's talk about the technology that goes into wedges. What interesting new technology go into Vokey wedges?
The Vokey wedges have been an industry leader for a long time, and they continue to push the envelope. The SM8 wedges, which have just launched, have really pushed the envelope on how you can make a wedge and center of gravity. It's all about where the CG is in the wedge, aligning it to the impact for the player, and what effect that's going to have to the ball flight. The technology in Vokey wedges is extreme. There's some multi-material construction that's going into it, and we can really help maximize people's ball speeds, spin rates and flight, and tailor a wedge or wedge setup to someone's game.
Andrew, perhaps you could share with us a bit about the relationship or the difference between bounce and grind.
The bounce of a wedge is the difference between the front edge and back edge of a wedge. So a wedge with higher bounce is going to sit with the leading edge more up, and less bounce is going to sit a little bit tighter to the ground. The grind of a wedge is all about how a player wants to play those shots. Do you play with an open face? And when you get in the bunker, how do you play those shots? And it's more about how the individual uses the wedge, whereas the bounce is more about what does that player need.
And what about the common misconception that the better player you are, the less bounce you actually need?
There's no average. Better players will use, if you talk about the PGA Tour, there's guys out there with 14 degrees of bounce and there's guys out there with 2 degrees of bounce. It really is all over the place, and it's depending on the person's style, not so much about their ability. And generally look in Southeast Asia, we fit more high bounce wedges, and that's across the board. Having a flexible wedge setup is the key.
All right, how about you show us the different bounces, the different grinds that you can have on wedges?
Yeah, sure. So we obviously have a wide range of different wedge heads, but you can separate wedge, the grinds and so on into two pretty distinct categories. If you start looking at wedges like a D grind we have here versus a K grind, you can see on the D grind there's a lot more shape out of that sole. There's some relief out of the trailing edge, the toe and the heel. This is a kind of wedges for someone who likes to play different face angles. I like to open the face, I like to stand on the toe a bit, I like to be really versatile around the green. Whereas you get to a K, this is someone who I don't really like to open it up. I'd want to play it pretty simple. I just want to square it up, hit it out, just get it on the green, get out of the bunker. Now that's not to say one's for a better player and one's for a beginner. It's more so how does that person like to use the club.
It's a preference thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are, for example, the S Grind. S is a Steve Stricker's grind. You can see trailing edge relief there, a little bit of heel, but a nice meld of the two heads. It's nice and versatile, but it's more for that player who's mostly square. Steve Stricker's renowned as one of the best wedge players of all time, and he's very simple in the way he plays. He doesn't really flare the face, he plays it pretty square, maybe lays his hands back. So the wedges are really based around what that player needs and how they want to hit it. It doesn't rob you from hitting shots, it's just trying to complement how you want to play.
So obviously there's a lot to process. What would the process be to get myself fitted here at the Titleist National Fitting Center?
The first process is have a look at your current irons, 9-iron pitching wedge, how far do they go? And then look at what exactly do we want the distance gaps to be. And so then we'll base the loft gaps off that. These days, because irons tend to go a little bit further, getting those loft gaps to match up to your irons and give you a nice blend of gaps is really important. Within that, we look at what do your bounces need to be on your full swings. Do you steep, you descend into the grass, are you pretty shallow? What do we need there? And then we go down to the short game area, hit some shots off some grass, tight lie, soft lie, bunker, and just see what's going to be the most suitable combination for you.
Sounds fun. Let's give it a go. Now, obviously, we would have liked to have done this wedge fitting outdoors, but this being Singapore, those of you who play here a bit will know it started to rain. But, Andrew, we can still do some pretty relevant things for wedge fitting indoors.
Yep, absolutely. Unfortunately, being on the equator, we see a lot of rain here, so we get quite good at fitting outside, fitting indoors. We have our old friend, the lie board here, so we're going to be able to hit some shots off the lie board and really get a good understanding of what your turf interaction would be. So we can simulate quite well. It's not as good as hitting off turf, but we can do a pretty good job anyway. So let's try that now.
Let's have a go.
So what we're going to do here is get you to hit some shots off the lie board, just your normal stock shot with a 58, not full, just that nice 3/4 shot.
Yep.
And we're going to look at what's the interaction like on the lie board, leading edge, back edge, what do we want the bounces to be on those kind of shots.
You haven't played enough golf with me, I never go anything other than full speed, but we'll try.
Yeah,
we'll try.
Yeah. Me either. We get that a lot in wedge fitting in someone. I don't like hitting half shots.
Yep.
That's because usually I start to duff it or thin it and these kind of things.
Yep.
And that's where good fitting can really help because, okay, although we're not trying to make you uncomfortable, we're trying to see, there's a room for improvement there.
Right.
Yep, nice. So if we have a look at your sole there, what we can see is not bad strikes. If anything, it's a little bit towards the front edge.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got all of this sole width here, but we're only using that little section there.
Yep.
So that center of pressure is really narrow. All of the force that you're putting into the ground is being distributed through that sharpest part of the club. Right. So the one that alarms me there is when we get a bit on that front edge.
Yep.
So do you sometimes, when you play these shots, get pretty big divots?
I do get, yeah.
Yeah. So what we see there is that leading edge is getting really exposed. So the dynamic of your club through impact starts to look that way. Mm-hmm. Now, that's actually a really good attribute for ball striking. There's a bit of shaft lean. Yep. But what we want to do is make sure you've got enough insurance on that front edge that it's not going to dig.
Right.
So what we'll try now is a wedge with a lot more bounce and see how that comes out. Same grinds, just 8 degrees to now 12 degrees of bounce.
Okay.
So we would expect to see maybe a little bit of back edge on this one.
Okay, so it's exact same wedge, it's just got more bounce.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Even ball flight wise, it feels more controllable.
Yeah, nice. And so
yeah, there is a difference there.
Yeah, so you see how now it's working back towards the middle of the wedge. Mm-hmm. So then if you see with the D, the same strikes move back into the wedge, more middle of the sole. And so now we've got a nice even distribution of that force. The leading edge is out of the grass, so you're not going to get that leading edge grabbing anywhere near as much.
It's gliding through better.
Yeah, and even when you do get a bit steep on it, you're not going to see it in your ball flight. Yeah, you might get a bit heavier in the turf, but it's still going to come out okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
It's going to help with the distance control as well.
Absolutely. It's going to give you maximum spin, and it's going to give you the best control of your distance, because if you think about if that club's coming in, the leading edge is digging into the ground, the ball is going to start rolling up the face. Yep. And so if it's not staying in the face long enough to compress, you're losing speed. It's going to come out high with no spin, that high loopy, hit the green and run out. Whereas at least now, if you get the bounce right, you'll actually find your ball flight comes out a bit flatter, a bit faster, and spins a bit more.
Seems like we've got it figured out as far as my full swing wedges, but around the greens I do like to open up my club face quite a bit. So how would the grind and the bounce of the proper wedge for me, how would that relationship work?
Yeah, so when you do play those shots around the green, you still engage the turf and you're still more likely to maybe catch it a bit heavy than thin it.
I miss it every which way, but I usually catch it a bit heavy.
Yeah. So we still want to look at bounces, wedges with a little bit more bounce for you. Mm-hmm. So for example, in the high bounce wedges, here we have the D and the K. Right. Now both these wedges have a lot of bounce, but the way the grind works is they're going to introduce them to the ground in a very different way. So for somebody who, like yourself, likes to play different face angles, still needs a higher amount of bounce, the D grind lets you play different face angles without adding bounce, and the K grind is more for the person who just wants to play it square. So if you see on the ground, when we get the D grind and open it up, the leading edge sits pretty much flared at square to the ground. Yep. Whereas the K, when you start to open up, the leading edge sits up a lot more. Yep. So that difference there is quite noticeable. So what we want to see is this would be beneficial for someone who opens it up and gets really steep. But for you, just keeping that same amount of bounce all the way through with the D Grind gives you a lot of versatility. It gives you protection against maybe catching a bit too heavy sometimes. And that in itself is going to give you the confidence to deliver the club down and hopefully start to reduce the thins and so on.
Right. Perfect, thanks Andrew, really appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully we'll hit some better wedge shots the next time I see you.
Our pleasure.
Well, we hope you learned as much from that video as we did making it. If you want more information about how you can get fitted at the Titleist National Fitting Center, click on the link in our description box below. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe for more great content, click on the Asian Tour logo. And to check out the next video in our series on getting into golf, click over here.